Okay, we are live, and today I have a special guest. I have the opportunity to speak to Suzanne Schneider, whose story is powerful as it is eye-opening. Suzanne is a registered nutrition and a PhD researcher at Warwick Medical School in the UK, diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 11. She lived with the burden of chronic illness for decades until complications led to kidney failure and a life-changing transplant. But instead of accepting the status quo, she turned that into a mission, a life mission. And she's now one of the leading voices calling for better evidence-based nutrition guidance, especially for transplant recipients and people with type 1 diabetes. I had the opportunity to see her speak at the 2024 Boca Raton Symposium for Metabolic Health, put on by the Low-Carb USA and the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners. But today's discussion goes far beyond diabetes. It's about resilience, critical thinking, and what can happen when patients stop settling for average outcomes. So Suzanne, it's an honor to have you here, and I want to get to the discussion. I have to, for legal purposes, put up our medical disclaimer just briefly. And once we get that out of the way, I am really looking forward to this conversation. For anyone that's listening today, any information that's shared here today is not a substitute for any professional advice or treatment by a licensed healthcare professional. You are advised to seek the care of a qualified doctor or medical professional when undertaking any changes to your nutrition, diet, or fitness, including anything that's discussed here today. And if you want to talk to anyone on the Ovadia Heart Health team, please email us at team@ifixhearts.com. With that out of the way, Suzanne, I am so looking forward to this conversation, and I want to start off with you opened up your Boca Raton talk more than a year ago, which was so inspiring to me, saying that your presence there was a miracle. Can you walk us through that moment and what brought you from being a patient on dialysis to standing on that stage, sharing your journey with others?
Wow. Yeah, thank you, Chris. It's quite a coincidence because just a few weeks ago, I actually celebrated my 9th transplant anniversary. So this,
Wow.
this particular period is quite an emotional one. And I just got back from a trip away. My promise to myself was that every year on that anniversary, I want to see something of the world that I've never seen before. And that's in recognition of, while you're on dialysis, it's very limiting life and you can't travel and your life is very restricted. So the fact that I was able to make it to that wonderful event was I'd never been to Florida, so that counted as one tick. But the mere fact that I had the opportunity to go and share this experience with people and say, please take note, this is something that we really need to know. It was a real honor. And I always dedicate every talk that I do to my donor and her family, because honestly, it's without her, none of this would have been possible. So it was definitely, credit to her and her family for giving me this second chance. So maybe I'll start just at the beginning and say, at the age of 11, we grew up on a farm in the middle of South Africa, and it's quite normal for children who grow up on farms to go to boarding school because the distances are quite far. And so I was sent to boarding school at the age of 9. And by the age of 11, unfortunately, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And it was a real struggle because at that age, well, I don't think at any age you want to be different to any other child, in your peer group. But it was so difficult to have to eat differently to everybody else, to go off and do your finger pricking, halfway through class, to stop during the middle of a sports game and take your blood glucose. And so it was a real battle of wills. And I think the thing that really saved me was the fact that I was really sporty. I represented my county in a number of sports, and I did a lot of swimming, tennis, and hockey. And I think that's what really helped me maintain my blood sugars. But in a way, it was probably also what I thought would get me out of eating what I wanted. funnily enough, though, every time I'd go to the doctor, they seemed to be quite happy with my results. And they're like, yeah, you're doing okay, keep going. With a result of, 7, 8, 9, sometimes as an HbA1c, and I was told that's absolutely fine. And now on reflection, you realize that, for every year that your blood glucose is above 7, HbA1c of 7, a type 1 person with type 1 diabetes reduces their life expectancy by 100 days. That's crazy. So we're patted on the back and told you're absolutely fine. And you think, continue eating. And, most doctors aren't around 10, 15 years later if you then develop these problems. So when they do then present themselves, it's quite a shock. And you go, well, how the heck did that happen? I thought I was doing everything right. And so, unfortunately for me, I seem to have developed those complications quite early because in my early 30s, I was diagnosed with quite fast progressing kidney disease. And then by the age of, I think it was about 35, I was told that I would need a kidney transplant. And it's not the easiest thing to accept. With that comes the understanding that your life is going to be very limited. Not only does it mean you're going to be on a very restricted diet, so depending on the type of dialysis you have, you either have dialysis at home, which means nightly treatments, or you have dialysis 3 times a week at the hospital. And in the periods in between, when you don't have dialysis, you feel absolutely awful because you have all these toxins inside of you which aren't excreted. And so for 3 years I was waiting for this miracle gift, this phone call that would tell me, Suzanne, we have these amazing new organs, get yourself to the hospital. And it was only after the 8th phone call that I'd gone to the hospital and told, no, not today, gone back home. After the 8th phone call, I finally got this transplant. And I was it was amazing. From the minute they plugged in those new organs, I was no longer a person with type 1 diabetes. I'd been given a new kidney and a new pancreas, so 2 for the price of 1. And it was incredible. And I thought to myself, how am I going to take care of this amazing gift? I want more than anything to look after this amazing gift. And that's what kind of started me on this journey.
Oh man, that's so incredible. And as someone who has a younger brother who is currently on kidney dialysis myself, it really hits home for me. And it's also amazing the idea that I think most people take that gift for granted before they lose it. I don't know, what you'd been thinking, but probably by the time you realized that the gift of your kidney and pancreas were in jeopardy, it was already too late. And you were given advice regarding your diet that is mainstream and accepted by so many. Talk to me a little bit about. I think you've said that when you got the kidney and the pancreas, that you had that incredible gift, but you didn't get a roadmap for how to take care of it. So you had the realization that you needed to take care of those things. But tell me a little bit about the process of how you figured out that the proper roadmap was a little different or a lot different than the roadmap that most patients are given.
Yeah, well, I have to reveal a little bit of my dark side because in a previous life, well, many years prior to that, I had actually done a marketing degree and worked for one of the big food manufacturing companies that produce chips and soda and all the foods that you really shouldn't be eating. And I was part of the problem promoting these foods to people. So I was very educated in the way of the wily ways of the world in terms of, how we motivate people to eat foods and make them believe things about the foods we're trying to sell them. But then luckily for me, I also had a bachelor's degree in nutrition. And I thought to myself, well, as much as I understand nutrition, I understand it in the broader sense, but I really want to understand it in how it applies to me, because the stuff that we were taught at a bachelor's level was very basic and didn't really explain the how. It just told you a little bit about this is what happens when this, then that, but not really the intrinsic details. And I thought that I wanted to take that a step further. And so I decided to do this master's degree in nutrition and psychology to really understand why we eat the foods we do, but also how the foods we eat influence the way we think and behave. So it's a bit of a circular process, because I think we don't often pay attention to the fact that actually what we eat does affect our brains. And through this process, I kind of started to realize that, heck, what I knew from 10 years ago has completely been blown out the water, and there's been a lot more insight and research into what's really known about the effects of things like the macronutrients and what we really need, especially things like the food pyramid and how that applies to people with diabetes who don't have a functioning normal metabolism like non-diabetics. And so fortunately for me, I had written my thesis and I went onto Twitter the one day and I said, oh, wish me luck. The cesspool of Twitter where nobody ever hears anything good. I'd gone onto Twitter and I said, wish me luck, I'm going to present this paper. And some kind soul wrote back and said, oh, I'd love to read your paper. And obviously I did some background reading to see who this person was. And I thought I'd trust this person, and I sent them my paper. And they read that and said, Suzanne, you have got to take this and present this at this conference, which was the Insulin 100 conference at the University of Toronto. And that was the university where they discovered insulin 100 years ago. And this particular conference was in recognition of, this wonderful discovery by Banting and Best. Thankfully for me, I was given this opportunity to present. And after the conference, this person on Twitter wrote back and said, well, what are you going to do now? And I wasn't quite sure, because I wanted to do this research and take it a step further, but I didn't quite know if I had it in me. And, it was wonderful that this person said, well, if you don't do it, who's going to do it? And like, what is preventing you? And it was honestly somebody who saw something in me that I definitely did not see in myself that encouraged me to, take on this PhD and started looking into the effects of, the benefits or the effects, maybe the benefits or not, of the ketogenic diet in people with type 1 diabetes, and to see whether this was helpful or harmful in terms of their eating behaviors. And so as a result, I've learned so much. But along the way, just back to your original question, how I actually found guidelines for myself post-transplant, doing the master's degree and studying for myself, I realized, gosh, what I'd been told was just not going to work. And so I started following a lower carbohydrate approach and started reading up for myself about actually what is the right thing, what is going to help my kidney, in the best possible way. And when I looked for any guidelines, there just wasn't anything available. And I just thought this couldn't be. I mean, currently in the UK, there are 6,500 people waiting for a transplant. And that is not right. A third of people who have this amazing gift have this gift for less than 10 years because these organs fail because of the effect of immunosuppressant drugs, the fact that we are nutritionally deficient, so your body isn't able to help with the proper assimilation, wound healing. It's quite dire. If you think, we spend so long waiting for this gift, and you want to do everything you can to honor this gift, and surely that can't be right,
Why do you think that the medical system is designed to provide advice that is suboptimal for so many, particularly people with type 1 diabetes? I want to give a little context to my question. At the symposium in 2024, an entire day was devoted to type 1 diabetes. And prior to that symposium, I was 58 years old and I knew nothing about type 1 diabetes. So it's to people outside of type 1, the knowledge is very limited to begin with. And then if you get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, therefore, that means that most people that have the disease are completely dependent in a lot of cases on the first doctor that they happen to be in contact with. And from what I learned, that advice, the mainstream advice, is designed to get people to some very base level, but is far from optimal, and far, there's reasons for it. I'm sure that you could elaborate on as to why the medical profession, I think, protects itself from patients ending up with hypoglycemia. But talk to me a little bit about the recommendations that people are given, and what you think the biggest barriers are to providing people with what they really need to have a superb, optimal life and outcome.
Yeah, that's a really good place to start, Chris, because in case there are people listening who aren't that familiar with type 1, the difference between people with type 1 diabetes and type 2 is that people with type 1 diabetes don't produce insulin themselves, and you rely on artificial insulin to help you regulate your blood glucose levels. People with type 2 diabetes do still produce some insulin, but it happens that their body becomes slightly more resistant to the insulin they produce, and they then have to produce more and more insulin to have the same effect. So there is a difference in that we rely on artificial insulin to help us regulate our blood glucose levels. Now, the problem with artificial insulin is that it is not an exact science. So what works today does not work tomorrow. And, the Einstein's theory of if you bash your head against the wall and you get the same answer, well, a type 1 diabetic would be more than happy if that happened every day, if they had to get the same result, taking the same amount of insulin every day. But it, unfortunately, is not that accurate. So things like exercise, your mood, your state of stress, underlying health conditions, the weather, there are so many things that affect your level of blood glucose and the effectiveness of your medication. But the biggest impact on your blood glucose levels is the food that you eat. And so the best way that you can help yourself maintain a sort of steady level of blood glucose is by, trying to reduce the amount of carbohydrates you eat, because those are the things that push up your blood sugars. Now, most people who are not diabetic, I would say all people who are not diabetic, have a range of between 4.6 and about 6 millimoles per deciliter of blood glucose that is a healthy range. Now, that's considered normal. Now, that's equal to about 1 teaspoon of sugar in your entire circulatory system. So if you eat any more sugar, your body is going to secrete insulin to help you bring that blood glucose back into normal. But a person with type 1 diabetes, if you eat any sugar, you're going to have to take insulin to try and bring this back into range. Now, the problem is if you've got insulin on board because you took insulin about an hour ago, or you just exercised, how do you know how much insulin to take? So it's a really rocky road. Now, what many medical professionals advise is, well, it's better to run high, because if you then give too much insulin, you've got room to move, because if you dip, then you're not going to go completely hypo. But the problem is if you go really high, you have lots of repercussions, like damage to microvascular organs. You have organ damage, so things like kidneys, your eyes. the ending of your fingers and toes. So that's why a lot of people with diabetes suffer with these conditions, because they often find their blood glucose runs higher than what is normal for any human. So many people tend to think that it's okay to run a little bit higher than normal because it's easier to control. I think also there's a big reliance on using technology. So a lot of medics prescribe the use of, say, an insulin pump. Now, while that's wonderful, it gives you almost like an ability to have a closed loop system. You can forget about, having to test and weigh and measure and everything. The pump and the CGM, continuous glucose monitor, will almost create an artificial pancreas for you. The problem is if you still continue eating as if you're not a person with type 1 and you're just taking 100 units of insulin to cover a bar of chocolate. A lot of research has shown that actually it's not just about the blood glucose levels, but actually also about the amount of insulin it takes to bring your blood glucose back into the normal range. Higher blood insulin levels have been linked to things like dementia, Alzheimer's, and a whole bunch of other repercussions. So if you can reduce your insulin to as much as needed, as little as possible, you're really going to help yourself. So even if you have a pump, not having nutrition guidance is not the answer. And I think a lot of medical professionals don't, unfortunately, have any nutrition training. So they rely more on the technology than they do to help you manage this, diet in the best possible way.
Yeah, this is, it kind of highlights a problem that seems to be recurring throughout mainstream medicine, and the assumption is that people will not be able to sustain lifestyle changes. They will not be able to change what they eat, and so the default is that we'll just develop a system that'll protect them in their, you know, whatever they're going to do, and that is really unfortunate for those people that want to achieve a higher outcome. And it's true for type 2 diabetes patients, and it's also true for other people with metabolic diseases, who, the assumption is that they cannot follow a low carbohydrate diet, so we'll just give them advice that is comfortable and allows them to meet some very unfortunately low bar of success. Um, I think just before we got on this interview, we both learned that earlier today, Dr. Richard Bernstein, who was a pioneer in type 1 diabetes research, he had type 1 diabetes himself, and I think I know he was. I'm just checking here. Yeah, he was 90 years old, and he died earlier today, and he outlived his the prognosis of what a type 1 diabetes patient, especially at, when he was first diagnosed. He was born in 1934, and he had diabetes for many years, and it was his research, a lot of it on his own personal condition, that led to the famous book, Dr. Richard Bernstein's Diabetes Solution, which I purchased 2 days after coming back from the Boca Symposium, and find it fascinating. I've learned so much about type 1 diabetes, but also about nutrition and low carbohydrate way of eating, as a result of my experience, what I've read, and people I've talked to like yourself. So tell me a little bit about Dr. Bernstein and what he means to the type 1 diabetes community and beyond.
Wow. Honestly, what a day, what a loss to the type 1 community. Honestly, Chris, I've recently completed, as part of my PhD, I've been doing a longitudinal study, and I've recently completed the 2-year follow-up of the study. And every single person that I interviewed for that study, and that was 37 individuals from around the world, mentioned some link to that book and how it had given them some advice and guidance, inspiration or hope that they had a different way of managing their type 1 diabetes. So it's really quite something that, somebody like him can leave such a wonderful legacy. And I think we all hope to do the same one day when we leave this earth, to leave it in a better place than we found it. But I wanted to come back to your statement about people who might want to follow a low carb or ketogenic approach, and a doctor or a healthcare practitioner or a dietitian might decide, oh no, I'm not even going to recommend this because it's too difficult. Now, I want to categorically say that is nonsense, because first of all, my 2-year study has proven just that it is not too difficult. All the people in my study were people with type 1 diabetes who have done the low carb approach for at least 2 years. 85% of them have done it for more than 5 years. So that is already a group of people who have successfully done this approach for 2 years or more. And of those people, none of them had episodes of diabetic ketoacidosis or hypoglycemia that required any hospital treatment. So I do think that's a bit of an outdated argument in terms of, it's too difficult to do. But equally, I think what is hard is, how can you decide for me that this is too difficult? If I'm the person who struggles at 2 o'clock in the morning with a hypo, I'm sweating, my family is waking up because I have to turn the light on looking for glucose tablets, that impacts everyone. My disease impacts not just me, but the people around me, the people I work with, my family. So sometimes my decision isn't just about, my own life, but also wanting to look out for the people around me. And part of my research, I had, included quantitative and qualitative insights. And a lot of the feedback that people were saying was, what is so frustrating is I get advice from someone who isn't a person with type 1, and they give me this advice, and I look at them and say, well, are you following any dietary advice? Because, like, clearly this isn't working for any of us. The standard dietary guidelines don't even seem to be working for the general population, because the incidence of overweight, diabetes, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease is just going up. And if you look at my numbers, things seem to be going well. And very few doctors actually inquire as to how people achieve those, because I think they don't want to perhaps dig a little deeper and perhaps admit that maybe the guidelines are in need of a review. I don't know, maybe it's a fear of having to change the system, but it is very frustrating when you see wonderful results and you're not curious enough to ask why.
Oh man, it's can you I think you hit on some really amazing points. I Tell me a little bit more about type 1 diabetes and uh, what kind of reaction do you get from others about what you do, what you share? I I know from the symposium where I got to meet and talk to people like Dr. Ian Lake, who I know. Incredible people who have done amazing things. I think he went um, on a run of 100 miles, fasted, which is just beyond comprehension for anyone to me. But it shows that the body is capable of things far more than what we're given credit for. And I watched as I shared meals with type 1 diabetes patients, and was able to see how they would order their meal with their needs in mind, and then they would measure their blood glucose, and then they would sometimes give themselves an injection right there during the meal. And they made it look, I mean, for me it was a little overwhelming, but they made it look rather effortless in at the same time. And I just wonder, tell me a little bit more about the experience, which for you is just a day-to-day thing, and for what other people might view as very difficult.
Yeah. I feel like a bit of an imposter because for my 9 years now, I have no longer been a person with type 1,
That's
which is
right.
wonderful. So I'm only going to talk from memory.
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to tell you what really stands out to me was way back when, the way that I would test my blood sugar was always through the finger prick test. And that was, to me, the most, it was so painful because you always had to go at the tips of your fingers on the side, because that's where you would get most easy access to blood. And it was also the most painful. So that was the most awful, but also the most visual. You're sitting there trying to, get a drop of blood out of your finger. And then you have to do this real time because you then have to know how much insulin to take. The great thing now is that you have technology such as the continuous glucose monitor, which you can just pop on your arm and you can just scan your mobile phone over it, which in an instant can tell you what your blood glucose level is, and you can then decide how to insulin adjust accordingly. So that's been amazing. And I think perhaps had I had access to that, I might even have had better control and probably tested more frequently. I, I,
Do you
I,
still do you still use a continuous glucose monitor at all?
I do not know. I measure my blood glucose maybe once every week, every 2 weeks, just to check. I've had an HbA1c of 4.4 for the last 9 years. So this little pancreas is working like a charm.
Tell,
It's
tell,
wonderful.
tell me about what type of food what kind of diet you're following right now.
I don't measure my ketones. I'll get to that in a sec why. But I definitely follow, I would say, a very low carb ketogenic diet. So I do a 16/8 fasting. For me, I find that works really well. I just find I feel better on it. It's not for any weight loss or any other purpose, just for the fact that in the morning I'm not really hungry. And then by the time it gets to around lunchtime, I tend to have an appetite around then. So I tend to have sort of uh, maybe some sort of protein and salad or something warm for lunch because I feel like I've eaten then. And the evening would be my main meal because I work during the day. Again, mostly uh, proteins, veg, salad. I really enjoy dairy, cheese, yogurt. Cheese is a weak spot, so whenever friends visit, they'll bring a piece of cheese or something good. So it is. I have adapted quite a lot, and it's not easy when the rest of your family perhaps still eats carbohydrates, but once they kind of know that that's how you eat, they stop offering you the dessert and they just go, oh, that's fine. Help yourself to whatever you want. It's just the first once or twice that might be challenging. And, I find even in the office, there's an office etiquette about, if it's someone's birthday, it's rude not to accept a piece of cake, or all you do is say, thank you, that's wonderful. You take the piece of cake and you say, thank you, I'll have this with my dinner this evening. You may or may not have the piece of cake, but you've not offended anyone. And you could always give the piece of cake to someone in the family who might want it. But,
Oh,
you know,
that's great advice. What what basic recommendations might you give to just the typical American or European on a what we call a standard American diet, who might not know even better about how they're um, eating the processed foods, which coincidentally you used to work for Big Food. They're eating those foods as far too big of a portion of their daily intake. What kind of advice would you give to that person, especially with the perspective that you have? I mean, you've kind of
yeah.
experienced all aspects of the possibilities.
It's very interesting because the one thing that you do in marketing is you look at how you can manipulate recipes to make your food as addictive and as moreish as possible. And every dollar you spend on a product is about making that product more, either you want your product to stand out above the rest. So if you spend it on packaging, on shelf life, on flavor, on on presentation. Everything is about making your product better than your competitor. So think about, if you're buying something that's in a packet, think about, okay, so why is this made the way it is? The wording they use in marketing, they use words that are not regulated. So healthy, wholesome, whole grain, whole wheat, uh, uh, heart friendly, all those words are not regulated. And you've got to ask yourself, well, am I just being led to believe that something is that, or is that genuinely the case? If you look at, there's a really incredible study, and if you'll allow me, I'll send you the link to the study after this
Sure.
talk. The researcher Kevin Hall and colleagues did a study on some participants. So they had a group of 20 participants divided into two groups. One group received sort of wholesome home-cooked food for 2 weeks, while the other group received, ultra-processed food for 2 weeks. Now, ultra-processed food, this was based on what is known as the Nova 4 scale. And this is a scale that kind of rates the level of processing that food has undergone. And Nova 4 is ultimately food that doesn't at all resemble the original product. So a packet of crisps that are salmon flavored has probably never seen a salmon in its life. So consider foods that come from a packet with branding and a barcode most likely to be ultra-processed food, roughly speaking. So these two groups followed that diet for 2 weeks. They had a 1-week washout period, and then they swapped over. And then they measured, the calorie intake and the weight gain of both these groups. And what they found was that it was the level of processing, but also the amount. So it was the level of processing within the food that impacted how much people ate. And people who ate this ultra-processed food diet ate on average 500 calories a day more than people who ate just a whole food diet. Now, it's kind of difficult to explain exactly how and why that happened, but the theory behind that would be that these ultra-processed foods they're lacking in a lot of the essential amino acids and essential fatty acids that you need to trigger these satiety hormones that help you feel satiated and go, okay, stop. So that's why you find in front of the telly, you can eat a tub of ice cream that's like 500 calories, no problem. But if you eat a steak that's got sufficient protein and fat, those satiety hormones will be triggered and you will soon start to feel full. But a lot of these ultra-processed foods don't tend to signal the satiety effect at the same rate as what whole foods do. And so that's why you find yourself overeating on these foods, and maybe even an hour or so later, you'll find yourself wanting to eat more. So if you were trying to help yourself just to eat healthily, and I am not here to tell you that you have to eat low carb, keto, whatever, you do what's right for you. Because ultimately there is no one diet that works for everyone. But the one thing that certainly does work for everyone is eating real food. So stuff that you would recognize as something that your grandparents would have eaten, picked from a tree, caught from a stream, killed in the field, something that you would recognize as food that hasn't been manipulated with emulsifiers and colorants and things that ultimately affect your satiety signaling.
Well, I mean, certainly that's advice that I think almost everybody could benefit from. I mean, clearly, I know Dr. Ovadia, who wrote a book called Stay Off My Operating Table, is a big proponent of eating as much as possible, sticking with one ingredient foods that don't have a long list of ingredients on the label. And, whether that's, healthy meats and vegetables and things that just aren't designed to get you to overeat. And so that's definitely. And then, what you've said about the fact that eating that way is not out of reach for most people. I mean, like, it's a decision that you have to make, but certainly when you start to realize that your life is what hangs in the balance, your health
Mhm.
and your quality of life. Just talk to me just a little bit about that, because um, you know, when you lose your kidney and you have to go to dialysis 3 times a week, as my brother does, um, he loses his independence. He loses his ability to hold down a full-time job. He loses his ability to travel to weddings. Last year, my family had a wedding in Italy. One of our nephews was married in Italy, and my brother was unable. And there was another one that wasn't even that far away. It was in Buffalo. So there were 2 weddings that he was unable to attend simply because he can't be that far away from his dialysis center. Um,
Yeah.
and it's a huge quality of life thing. And it doesn't just affect people with the loss of their kidney. It's people that have type 2 diabetes who could have prevented and still may be able to reverse it. But during the time when you're dealing with full-blown type 2 diabetes, your entire quality of life suffers. And there's been, like who wants to spend the last, I think the average is that the American average um, has 13 years of poor health at the end of their life. So the average age is something around 76, but most people experience more than a decade of poor health
Mm.
before their life ends. And I don't think anybody wants to go through that, especially people that have an alternative. So,
Yeah.
I mean, your message is so powerful. Is there anything about your current study and research that you want to elaborate on any more, and anything about what you hope that will lead to?
Yeah, Chris, I really appreciate you asking, because I feel whoever needs to hear this, even if there's one person on this call that, like you, I hope to goodness that your brother is lucky and gets this wonderful gift. And if he does, then hopefully this paper will be something that can help him and guide him to look after this gift. The research we did, I had searched every single, I did a literature review and then a review of the gray literature. So just going into organizations and checking the International Kidney Organization, the American Kidney Foundation. I looked and searched and hunted and found absolutely no guidelines. And so what I then had to do was go and try and see what studies I could find individually for people post-transplant, and what do we know about the various macronutrients and micronutrients, specifically the ones that while you're on dialysis, you're told there are certain restrictions related to those macro and micronutrients. And it's very interesting because a lot of the research, certainly for protein, for example, was done years ago. The most recent one was a study from 2010. So surely there's got to be updated knowledge since then. But a lot of the research is not done because, well, a fear of doing research on patients who already have this kidney disease and they potentially have comorbidity. So it's difficult to research this group. But it's almost like, I don't know. I don't know why more research hasn't been done, but we certainly know that specifically in the period straight after transplantation, your need for protein is massively increased because you've got this wound healing. You've got the effect of, this, you have the effect of the damage that has been done from the new organ that's been transplanted into this organ. So in the time that it's spent outside of being in a body, it's had oxidative stress applied to that organ. And then you have the stress of these immunosuppressant drugs. So there's an extra need for the body to have additional protein, certainly in the first month after the transplant, there's absolutely no guidance on telling you to eat more protein just to help you through that wound healing process. Then you look at something like carbohydrate and you think, okay, well, the incidence of metabolic disorders after transplantation is increased. So things like type 2 diabetes, hypertension, are all increased after a transplant. And there's a condition known as new onset diabetes after transplant, so NODAT. So the incidence of NODAT after transplant is also increased. And these are all related to metabolic disorders. And yet, we're not telling people anything about carbohydrate restriction. And we know that if you have better blood glucose control, that also helps your kidneys, because insulin is the one thing that helps you to manage the sodium levels within your kidneys. So insulin is what encourages sodium to be, drawn back into the kidneys. And if you draw more sodium back, salt back into the kidneys, that's going to cause more pressure in the kidneys. And then that's going to cause hyperglomerular pressure and blood pressure, which is not great for the survival of your kidney. So the higher your insulin needs, the higher your blood pressure ultimately. So if you eat less carbohydrate, you're going to need less insulin. So why aren't we guiding people on reducing carbohydrate? I mean, there's just so many things that I've looked at and I just thought, this cannot be. Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy for us to share the link to the paper too, if that's of help to anyone.
Yes. I'm going to give you the opportunity to share any links that you want me to put into the show notes. This will be available on YouTube, the recorded, the whole interview. And then in the show notes, we will include ways that, any links that you share. And if you want to tell people where they can find you right now, somebody that might have a concern, that, I know you post on LinkedIn. I know that you have an X account. What's the best place for someone to sort of follow what you're sharing?
Both of those. So Suzanne Schneider, I think, is my X account, Twitter X, whatever you call it these days.
Yep.
Suzanne Schneider 1. I don't know how many of us there are, but I'm number 1, so I'll take it. Suzanne Schneider 1 on LinkedIn is my account. And I'll share those with you also if that's helpful. And I'm happy to, help anyone if that's.
And any links that you have to your own study or anything else, I'll put a link to Dr. Bernstein's book in there.
Yes.
Also very important is Low Carb USA has a playlist on their YouTube channel featuring only the speakers who spoke about type 1 diabetes at the symposium last year. That's a great playlist. I had the privilege of listening to all those presentations live and in person, but I've listened to several of them on a recorded version. So certainly anybody that has type 1 diabetes or has a person that they love who has been diagnosed and doesn't know where to turn, there are some great resources and great people. You have any other thoughts that you'd like to share with the people that are listening right now, and the literally hundreds more who will listen to the recording?
Oh, I just want to say, honestly, there is hope. There is hope. And honestly, if you feel that you are perhaps, maybe you're watching this because you are potentially facing, a kidney diagnosis similar to what I had, or somebody has just been diagnosed with type 1 and you are so fearful of what the future holds because you've been told that type 1 diabetes is this awful thing. I promise you that there are people in this community who are more than willing to help you. And there are some amazing resources out there. One that I would also recommend, you mentioned Dr. Ian Lake. He has a page called Type 1 Keto, which is great. There's loads of interviews. I think they even some podcasts and reading resources on there, and he does consultations with new parents and things, and honestly, a really great resource. Dr. Bernstein's book was one that I found really helpful. Even on Facebook, there are some great support communities where you can go and just, sometimes you just want to talk to other people going through a similar experience, and just know that you're not alone. Because I think, certainly for me, in my entire school, call it a career, I don't know if you call it a career these days, but my school period, I was the only person with type 1 throughout my school life. And I felt so isolated, Chris. It was dreadful. And, when I finally got to meet other people, I thought, oh, so I'm not abnormal for feeling this way. And just having other people that you can talk to is so helpful. So if I can help anyone, please do get in touch. I'm more than happy to. If I can't help you, at least refer you to someone else. But just know that you are not alone, and there is a better way to handle your diabetes than to follow advice that was written in the 1970s, not even for people with type 1 diabetes. The dietary guidelines written in 1971 were written based on an Ansel Keys study on men in their 50s. And this became population-based advice, which is not relevant to people with type 1 diabetes who cannot manage carbohydrate. So please be curious and know that there is help available, is what I would say.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Suzanne, for taking the time to share. I know I can only tell you that you inspired me with your talk in Boca more than a year ago. And I was really impressed when I saw the paper that you recently put out on LinkedIn, and the passion that you have for sharing this information with other people is powerful. And I know a lot of people will benefit from listening to this, and that just keeps spilling over. And so is there anything else you'd like to leave us with? I mean, you've given us so much great information, and I really appreciate it.
I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. I think, let me just see.
Well, I have one comment that came in on YouTube from Kenji. So just a compliment, really. And I encourage you, Kenji, to when this gets posted on LinkedIn, there's going to be some links. Also, you can follow Suzanne on X, which is Suze Schneider. And what was it again on LinkedIn?
So Suzanne Schneider 1.
Okay, you're not that hard to find, and you share some great information, and there's a whole community. I will put all these links in the show notes on YouTube. They're findable on the iFix Hearts YouTube channel.
Can I just say, Kenji, that is amazing. How wonderful. 9 months post heart transplant. That's a whole new life. 9 months. It takes 9 months to create life. Well, you have just done 9 months. I hope you're feeling amazing. I really, really hope you're feeling well.
That is fantastic. And I mean, it's like stories like this is what kind of keeps us all going.
Really.
So best of luck, Kenji, and thank you for listening. We appreciate your comment. And I guess with that, we will wrap things up. I really hope I get the chance to see you speak again at a presentation, Suzanne, and I hope I get the opportunity to interview you again at some point in the future.
Oh, Chris, wonderful. And I equally wish the same. And honestly, thank you for this opportunity. It's really a pleasure to speak with you again, and hopefully connect with some of your audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure is all mine. And to our audience, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.